job of winter composting, the do's, the don'ts, and how to go about doing it so you are successful.
For sure. I think the biggest thing when it comes to winter composting is thinking about what method of composting you're going to do. And I'm not talking about like a hot compost. I'm talking about if you have your compost bin outside, whether it be like a compost pile versus a tumbler. It's good to think about that because depending on where you live, you could face some challenges.
Right, up here where we're located and many parts of the country that hear our show each week on the radio are very, very frigid temperatures here in southeast Wisconsin. It is not uncommon some of the colder times of winter to have 5 degrees Fahrenheit ambient temperature with a wind chill of negative 20 to negative 30 degrees. That is not a regular occurrence, but it does happen quite frequently. So if you're thinking about, I'm just going to have a little compost pile in the backyard and make compost during the winter, you will want to think again. Yes, you can just go ahead and dump your kitchen scraps on top of that existing pile, assuming your municipality allows for such of an open pile to exist. But the activity in which that pile will be almost non-existent because of that cold temperatures that are being created by the weather.
Right. So that's something that you want to think about is the pile. Now, if you can use a compost tumbler or a turner, that would be more ideal because you're going to have it off the ground and you can keep it from hopefully freezing.
Well, if you're going to tumble in a tumbler, that's quite easy to do. If you've got it on the ground and you have a substantial pile, there is some internal warmth that is created during the breakdown process if the right balances are achieved in the pile, the browns and the greens. And in order to get that to turn over, you can take a garden fork or a shovel and move that ground pile from point A to point B. Or you can go to powerplanter.com and get their 36 or 48 inch auger and attach it to your drill and mix it that way as well and make it very convenient as a composting mixer.
Now, one thing people don't always think about is making sure you're adding the carbon or the brown during the winter. So what happens is that during the winter, you might be collecting all of your kitchen scraps and putting them out to the compost or into the compost, but you're not thinking about like things like dried leaves or straw or yard debris.
You can also use shredded paper and cardboard. Now, some people shy away from the cardboard application because of the levels of toxicity that may exist in the glue that the cardboard is put together. However, if you're eating fast food, if you're living in an urban setting, you're already ingesting some level of toxicity. A little bit in a cardboard box is probably not going to be detrimental to you or the soil in your garden.
Right. And with that being said, one thing you can do if you are concerned about the browns you're adding or the carbon you're adding is you can collect your leaves in the fall, put them in a bag, and then as you compost throughout the winter, you can add some leaves as you add your greens.
And what we do is we just make a giant mountain of leaves in the garden over top of our garden beds, and that way it's accessible and ready to use in the spring. But in the application of a compost, winter composting, you can certainly include those, and you can get a paper shredder and shred the paper and mix that in as well. Also, there's other things that you can add. The key to this whole winter composting thing is, number one, it's not going to be as rapid as it would be in July when it's in December or January. Number two, if the pile is frozen, it's not breaking down or breaking down incredibly slow. So we want to keep that pile above freezing. And there's some ways in which we can do this.
Right. So one thing you can do is definitely is to insulate it. So if you have an active compost right now and you can dump it in your garden for the winter or over a garden bed, you want to do that. And then you would take some straw or some cardboard and try to kind of line the compost, especially if you have a compost pile. If you have a turner, you're just going to have to make sure you have, you keep turning it to help keep whatever's in there moving and composting.
So if we have it on the ground, what you mean by insulation is like take 3 pallets or 4 pallets and create a box, and then put straw, the leaves of the straw. Well, when you break a square bale open, there's what's called leaves, which are about 6 inches compaction is the way the baler makes it. So you would stack those kind of like an R factor in an attic. The more thicker you put it, the more warmth in which you can contain in that pile.
Right, and you would cover it with a tarp or something as well. Yeah.
So that's one way of insulation. And then as you turn the pile, the activative ingredients, the browns and the greens, will interact with the oxygen and create a warmth in the internal portions of the compost pile. In the summertime, it's not uncommon to get a hot compost pile to get to 170, 180 degrees. Some of these large manufacturers of compost in the humongous mountain windrows, as they are defined as, they have very successfully roasted turkey wrapped in tinfoil in these mounds of compost because it's over 200 and 250 degrees in the center of these things. So the compost can get very hot in the summertime. It will not exceed that magnitude if you don't have the volume to go with it.
Right. So then another thing you want to do is you want to think about the moisture level in your compost pile.
But wouldn't that freeze, though? But we're keeping it warm and heated, essentially, to avoid that frozen block of compost.
Right. Depends on where you are, but insulation should help keep the moisture in. Also, you have to think about if you are using like a compost tumbler, if you have enough greens, it should keep the moisture in as well. If you live in like the Pacific Northwest where it just rains a lot throughout the winter, you might want to invest in a tumbler or a turner versus a pile because it could get almost too moist.
Well, when we talk about, we're all familiar with a tumbler, whether it's homemade out of a 55-gallon drum or commercial grade tumbler of many shapes and sizes and capacities. When we have it on the ground, the size is the key here. Now, the pile should be about 4 foot in diameter and about 3 foot deep. So you've got a very good size amount of material in which is breaking down over this time period. And again, you can cover it with a plastic tarp, or there's cloth tarps that are a little more thicker that may hold in that the heat a little bit better. So you can do that as well. Put rocks along the edge so that the tarp doesn't fly over. And the other thing with winter composting in any aspect of it, when it snows, the snow is actually an insulation. It creates there's a certain chart that based on the number of inches, it equates to the number of R factors as the insulation would be in your attic or in your walls. When it snows on the farm, let's say this time of year, it snows. We've got a lot of rain and it snows, but it doesn't freeze the ground, so you're still breaking through the soil, and you can't get out and harvest the crops. You want that hard freeze before the snow. That way the equipment can travel over without breaking through. That snow insulates that ground and keeps it from freezing. So when you get the snow on the tarp or on top of your pile, that's actually a good thing. It's holding the heat in, even though it doesn't seem, it's counterintuitive. It does hold and keeps it from freezing.
Right. So that is, snow is actually can be very insulating, as you'd said. Now, if you just determine that outdoor composting is not for you, you're just going to maybe just have a compost pile and you're like, I don't want to try to insulate it. I don't want to try to do this, blah, blah, blah.
None of this mumbo jumbo stuff. Yeah.
Mumbo jumbo stuff. You're like, my compost pile is out.
None of your business.
300 feet out back
Right.
or something and you don't want to deal with it. So you can do indoor composting, and a popular way is doing worm composting. You're probably thinking, I don't know if I want to invite a bunch of worms into my home, but this is typically done on your own level, like on a homeowner's level or a renter's level or whatever, with like a big Rubbermaid type container. And then you would add the worms and add your compost scraps, and then they would break it down so it is contained. Yeah,
there is some steps and correct procedures in order to move through that, but it works very, very well. And the worms, you have to get special worms here. and the worms will not overpopulate themselves. Once they get to a certain level of population, they will stop reproducing unless you take a certain group of them or a number of them and move to another composting bin. Then they will start reproducing again. They're very unique creatures, and then they will also create worm castings, which are very beneficial to your garden, that you can take and sprinkle out in the garden or put in a tub or whatever and save until springtime. Or you can save for seed starting. You can directly sow plants in worm castings as well. So that worm, and it doesn't stink. That's the thing that a lot of people think, oh, it's going to smell like a cattle lot in here because I got worms eating. But if you do it right, and there's many great videos and articles online. If you do it correctly, it is very, very beneficial and works very, very well with that.
Right. So that is another way to compost indoors. They also sell all sorts of different food cyclers, basically is what they are. And what they do is they dehydrate your kitchen scraps and then chop them up to then break them down faster once they're dehydrated. The likeliness of them spoiling slows down. So then once they're dehydrated like that, you would add them to your compost in the summer or in the spring.
In the spring, all right. So this is just the little tip of the iceberg when it comes to winter composting. Want to put that on your radar so you're aware that it does exist, and you can do more research if you want to extend and make compost over the winter at a slower process, or if you just want to take it and dump the stuff in a pile in the garden and then deal with it in spring. That certainly is a very good reason, a very good way to go about doing it too.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.